My heart slammed against my chest when I heard the front door creak open. I wasn't expecting him back for another 5 hours. My hands shook as I tried to steady myself, gripping the armrests of the chair like they could anchor me to this moment. He stepped inside, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet, but somehow every sound in the house grew louder. His suit was slightly rumpled, his tie loose, but his expression told me everything. He didn't say a word. Just stood there looking at me like he could see right through me. The air in the room thickened and I could feel my skin crawl under the weight of his gaze. I hadn't had time to clean up, hadn't had time to prepare myself. The house was too quiet. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly. He finally spoke, breaking the silence that had stretched between us like an unbearable rope. "You want to tell me something?" His voice was low, tight, like he was holding something back. But his eyes were cold, almost calculating. I didn't know what he knew, but I could feel it, the accusation hanging in the air. My throat went dry. I wanted to say something, anything, but nothing came out. It wasn't the words I needed, it was the truth. And I wasn't ready to face it. I couldn't stop thinking about yesterday. Every detail, every glance between us replayed in my mind like a loop I couldn't escape. He had been so close, closer than anyone should be in this house, his breath warm on my skin as we passed each other in the hallway. That brief moment, that split second of tension, was enough to make me question everything. I promised myself it was just a mistake, a one-off, a slip. But the truth was I couldn't shake it. That moment had been too sharp, too real, to simply brush aside. I tried to push the thoughts away, telling myself it wasn't a big deal, that I was overthinking. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, heard his voice, felt the heat of his presence still lingering in the air. I shifted uncomfortably in my chair, glancing out the window, trying to focus on something, anything else. But then I saw it, his car pulling into the driveway. My pulse spiked and I froze. What was he doing here again? Was it another mistake, or was this something more? I didn't expect it to happen. He was just here for the documents, but as he stepped closer, something shifted. His presence filled the room, making the space between us feel charged, almost unbearable. He wasn't standing at a distance anymore, and before I could even think, his hand brushed against mine. It wasn't an accident. Our eyes met for a moment, a quiet, silent understanding passing between us. And then, in one swift movement, his lips were on mine. The kiss was brief, quick, but so intense that it felt like time had stopped. I couldn't pull away. I didn't want to. We both knew it was wrong, but neither of us could stop it. We tried to justify it afterward with awkward laughs as if nothing had changed, but deep down I knew we couldn't take it back. Then, just as I was trying to steady my breath, the doorbell rang. It was the cousin. He had seen everything. I froze, unsure of what to do next. He didn't say a word, just stared at us for a moment before quietly muttering, "I thought you were smarter than this." The tension in the room thickened and I could feel my pulse racing, my voice faltering as I tried to explain, but something in my tone betrayed me. Lately he had been showing up more often. Cousin. It was subtle at first, just quick visits, but his presence felt different now, like he was always watching, always observing. His eyes lingered longer on me than they used to, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew something. Each time he walked through the door, there was that heavy silence, like the air itself was charged. I did my best to act natural, to pretend everything was fine, but the longer he stayed, the harder it became to hide the guilt that weighed on my chest. He never asked any direct questions, never accused me, but the way he watched made it clear he was piecing things together in his own mind. One night, as we were sitting at the kitchen table, he caught my gaze, holding it a little too long, and then he said it, softly, almost casually, "You know I can help if you need anything." The words sent a chill down my spine. What did he mean? Was he aware of what had happened, or was he just testing me? I couldn't tell. My heart pounded in my ears, but I forced a smile, pretending I was fine, hoping against hope that he hadn't figured it out. When he walked through the door, it was like the ground shifted beneath me. He wasn't supposed to be back yet. His trip was supposed to last days longer. But there he was, standing in the doorway, looking at me with that familiar yet distant gaze. "Business trip's over," he said, his voice low and almost tired. I forced a smile, rushed to him and planted a kiss on his lips, trying to make it feel normal. But as our lips touched, something didn't feel right. It was like kissing a stranger, like there was a wall between us that hadn't been there before. I pulled away, but before I could say anything, I caught a glimpse of him, my nephew, standing silently in the doorway watching. His gaze wasn't just casual. It was intense, like he could see right through me. I turned back to my husband, but the words caught in my throat. Then, in a voice so calm it felt like ice, he asked, "Are you cheating on me?" He didn't raise his voice, but the weight of the question shattered everything. The silence that followed was unbearable, like the air had thickened, and I knew he already had the answer. The questions started coming one after another, sharp and relentless, and I couldn't answer any of them. My husband's eyes pierced into mine as he asked things I couldn't explain, things that didn't have simple answers. Where were you last night? Why do you always act so distant? His voice, so quiet yet so full of accusation, made my skin prickle with anxiety. And then the cousin, he wasn't saying it outright, but I could feel the pressure mounting. "You're going to have to make a choice," he said one evening, his tone more serious than ever. His words hit me like a hammer, and for the first time I realized the trap had already been set. It was too late to escape. My nephew's gaze weighed on me, burning through my defenses. Every glance he threw my way felt like a reminder of my mistakes. I could feel his presence constantly, like he was watching, waiting for me to make my next move. The walls were closing in on me, and I knew it. My world, the one I had taken for granted, was slowly starting to crumble, piece by piece. It was all slipping through my fingers, and I was powerless to stop it. It all happened so suddenly. One moment I was standing in the kitchen trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy, and the next all three of them were in the same room: my husband, my cousin, and my nephew. My heart raced, and the air in the room felt like it was closing in. I realized in that instant that every word, every look, could be the one that unraveled everything. I had no control over the situation anymore. My husband remained silent, his expression unreadable, but I could feel the tension in his stillness. The cousin, however, wasn't as calm. His eyes flicked between the two of us, narrowing with suspicion, until he finally broke the silence with a question that sliced through the tension. "Are you with him?" His voice was steady, but there was no mistaking the weight behind his words. The room went dead quiet. I could feel the blood draining from my face, my mouth suddenly dry, and I knew the truth was hanging in the air, just waiting to be said. The conversation abruptly stopped, but the silence screamed louder than anything. We all knew that the facade was gone, that there was nothing left to hide. I hadn't expected it to happen, but there it was, an awkward, undeniable moment. My nephew had accidentally peeked into the room while I was changing, the door slightly ajar. He quickly turned away, his face turning a shade of red I hadn't seen before, but that brief, unintended glance had already shifted the air between us. I adjusted my clothes hurriedly, my mind racing. I knew I'd need to speak to him later to explain that some things were meant to stay private. But before I could even gather my thoughts, the sound of the front door creaking open startled me. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. The cousin was back. I barely had time to react before he walked straight into the room, and there we were, me and my nephew standing too close, a moment that couldn't be ignored. Our faces were inches apart, and everything felt like it had paused in time. The cousin said nothing at first, but his eyes, they spoke volumes. I stood there, frozen, scrambling for an explanation, but there was none. Just as the silence thickened, my husband walked in, and the cousin, his voice calm but edged with something darker, said, "I don't think this is a coincidence anymore." The weight of his words shattered the air, and the tension that followed was suffocating, thick with unspoken truths. I searched desperately for something to say, a way to fix the mess I'd created, but I knew it was too late. His face was stone, unreadable, but I could feel the weight of his disappointment in every inch of the room. He wasn't the man I had known. He wasn't angry, just resigned. "You destroyed everything I built," he said, his voice low and painful. The words hit me like a slap, sharp and final. I wanted to scream, to beg for forgiveness, but I knew it wouldn't matter. Everything was already broken, and no apology could piece it back together. The truth settled heavily in my chest, suffocating me with its weight. I had crossed a line I could never uncross, and the life I had known, safe, predictable routine, was gone forever. I glanced at the cousin, who stood silently in the background, watching it all unfold. He hadn't said a word, but the look in his eyes was colder than ever, like he had been waiting for this moment, like he had expected it. His gaze felt sharper, almost accusatory, as if he had been quietly passing judgment all along. The silence stretched between us, thick and unrelenting. The door slammed shut behind him, and I didn't hear him leave, but I felt it. My husband was gone, and with him, any chance of fixing what I had broken. The house felt colder, emptier than ever. I stood there, not crying, not even feeling sorry, just hollow. He had walked out, not burdened by any lingering hope, leaving me alone with the mess I had made. My nephew disappeared just as quickly, his presence now just a memory, but it lingered in the back of my mind, a shadow I couldn't escape. He was gone, but something in the air still felt charged with his gaze, still watching, still judging. The cousin remained quiet, standing on the sidelines, an observer to my fall from grace. He didn't speak, but the weight of his silence pressed down on me like a suffocating cloud. Nothing was left. No explanations, no chance of redemption. The house, the life I had once known, was a shell of what it had been. It wasn't my home anymore. It was just four walls, empty and silent, and I was the only one left inside.